Everyone. My name is Katy Lee, and I am a licensed professional counselor with Core Medical. And I wanted to share a little bit today about popcorn brain, what it is, and what we can do to help with it. I think this is something that a lot of people have really looked at and talked about. It's a little bit of a new buzzword, especially coming up in a world where it feels like our brain is simply going a million miles an hour and not really stopping. So I thank Core Medical for allowing me to be able to talk a little bit to you about this, and hopefully you can get some tips and tricks on how to help with it. So the first thing that I would like to do is really ground everybody into this information, right? So again, we're talking about a subject where we think about so many different things all the time that our brain feels a little bit like popcorn, right? Like different ideas are popping off. So one way to do that, and one way that we can do that really consistently, is by grounding ourselves into the environment we're in currently. So what I would like you to do is place your feet firmly on the floor. Now, you can do this standing or sitting, so either way works. So place your feet firmly on the floor where you feel really grounded, really stable. You're not moving around or anything like that. And then put your hands to your sides, right? So your hands and your arms should kind of be more limp and relaxed at your sides, whether that's placing them in your lap. If you're standing, maybe they're just hanging there. And I want us to close our eyes for just a moment and really think about our environment, right? So think about what is in our environment. Do we have chairs? Do we have lights? What kind of sounds are happening? What kind of smells are happening? What kind of things can we feel? Is it warm or cold? And really kind of get a sense of that. Now I want us to really think about our environment being safe and secure and knowing that we're going to be okay to open up our minds and just relax into this, right? So our environment is safe. We have a really grounded place. Take a couple of deep breaths. And when I teach deep breaths, one of the things I teach is to place our hands on our stomach and really allow our belly to fill with air, right? We want that diaphragm to come down. So we're not taking shallow breaths, we're taking really deep breaths. Maybe breathe in for about 3 seconds. We'll hold it for a second and breathe out for 3. Do that one more time. And now having our body kind of relax into this. So let's start off with a little bit of a scenario of what popcorn brain looks like. So imagine this, we're in a Microsoft Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting or whatever kind of technology you use to do recordings or meetings, and you're nodding to the conversation when you realize you forgot to pick up your prescription. How many of us have done that? Probably most of us, right? Oh, now my brain is running on a list of different things. So we reach through to our phone to text our partner, to text a friend or a family member, hey, can you pick up this prescription for me? But then you notice that there's a notification on your screen. Maybe it's from Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or other things I don't know anything about, really, and that catches your eye. So then you're like, oh, I got to check that out, right? One of the ones we talk a lot about is Amazon, right? Oh, there's a deal on something that I've been looking at for a really long time. So before we know it, we're reading customer reviews on this. We're really looking at the testimonials. Is this good? Is it good for my money? Is it not? And now, with a couple of taps, we've gone from our browser to the buyer, right? So, oh, now we're going to go buy this. But then when we regain our focus to what we were starting with, whether it's our Teams meeting or Zoom meeting or whatever else, we realize it's ended. And then it hits us, we still haven't asked about our prescription, right? This is the world of popcorn brain. This is where we get so distracted by everything else in our life, about our technology, about things that we have to do, about all of our responsibilities, that we forget to focus on the things right in front of us and be in the moment. So the term popcorn brain was coined by a quality of life researcher, David Levy. So he defined it as being so hooked on electronic multitasking that a slower paced life offline holds no interest to us. So how many of us can really relate to that, right? So many of us get so distracted so easily by our technology, our phones, our computers, our tablets, or whatever that is, that simply sitting and being in the moment is often really uncomfortable for us, right? So we have to like overload our brain with so much information and so much stimulus that our brain actually doesn't know how to function appropriately, and it starts popping off these things, right? So what we see is our focus is diminished. We have heightened stress levels. So a lot of us will talk about, I just feel like I can't catch up. I feel like I can't relax. I can't get away from anything because things are constantly popping up. One of the things I like to talk with people about in this is how many of us go on vacation or somewhere with our families and we get notifications from work, whether that's emails or messages or whatever, and we immediately just look down because we're always connected. But when we do these type of things, it causes a lot of fatigue. So a lot of people report, I feel like I have no energy. I feel like I can't wake up in the mornings. I feel like no matter how long I sleep, I just don't feel good. And then we see a lot of anxiety and depression develop from this, right? We feel so anxious that if we're not constantly connected, we're missing something, we're going to be late on something. But then we feel really depressed because we also feel like we never get downtime. We never recuperate. We never sit and are in the moment with our friends. So we often miss a lot of that connection. And so all of those things kind of filter through this popcorn brain. So let's talk about our devices and our attention span. And this is actually really good too for those who maybe have kiddos or nieces and nephews or work with anybody who's young. This is actually really, really important to notice and to also work on in them having a device or having electronic. So our attention spans have declined from an average of 2.5 minutes in 2004. So 2004, we didn't have access to everything 24/7 as much as we do now. So we got about 2.5 minutes of focus time to 47 seconds since 2020, right? So think about that. We went from 2.5 minutes to 47 seconds. And if I challenge everybody who's listening to this to really think about how often they are distracted or they are doing other things besides focusing on what they're supposed to do in the moment or who they're with in the moment, you would agree it probably is close to 47 seconds or even less. Now we see this a lot with kids as well, right? Kids' brains aren't developed to focus very long anyways. And then we give them devices, we give them constant stimulus, and their focus goes from maybe about a minute to about 20 seconds. That is really, really hard to help kids learn and develop when our attention span is 20 seconds long. So just kind of make that a note, and this is really what feeds into that popcorn brain. Now, the reason this is so important and a lot of times can be really hard for people is that we have this instant gratification piece, right? So instant gratification, meaning that we see some stimulus, and I'm going to use technology because this is really what it's based around when we were talking about popcorn brain, but this could be anything, right? This could be candy, this could be technology, this could be something going on outside, whatever that looks like, something we want to buy. So we see the stimulus, and then our brain processes this information. Now, when we're digital, we have this 24/7 availability to do that, right? So because we have the 24/7 availability, when we take in all the stimulus, our brain actually changes of how it processes the information. So oftentimes it's like, I'm going to look at all these feel-good things, or I'm going to look at these things that give us strong emotional reactions, right? So things that might make us feel really good. I think of like cute puppy and kitty videos or baby videos or, whatever we get hooked on there. Also things that make us feel strong negative emotions. So maybe they're posts that ignite some frustration in us or ignite some passion in us that we get really upset about, right? I think a lot of people get sucked into these arguments online about different opinions or information that's out there. That is also a stimulus that changes how our brain works, right? So here's the thing. When that happens and we have 24/7 availability in it, We tend to want to consume it more because it makes us have these strong emotional reactions, which makes our brain kind of say, okay, I actually want to engage in this. But then what happens is it weakens our ability to maintain focus. And then it also weakens our ability to engage in deep, sustained thought processes. So think about it. We probably scroll, and I think Instagram or TikTok, and excuse me, I don't use these a lot, so I might be misrepresenting these. But you can kind of just scroll, right? I mean, I know Facebook does this too. Like you can look at videos, they're 15 seconds long, you just scroll. That weakens our ability to really think critically about things because we can react so instantly, which is a part of our brain that is not as formulated as our cognitive part, right? So if we think of our frontal cortex, that's our cognitive thinking. We can think through situations, we think about the context, but this really focuses on the emotional part of our brain that's impulsive and just we go pretty quickly through it and oftentimes make choices or do things that we don't want to. Now, social media is like a reward, right? So likes and comments trigger dopamine. It prompts us to seek more. So it's very much like an addiction. So we do talk a lot around technology addiction and things like that because it does spike our dopamine, which makes us want to do it more, right? Then the abundance of that causes cognitive overload. Our processing and retaining information becomes really difficult, right? So because we're distracted, we're not focused, we can't really process deep information and store it correctly. And then the data overload encourages us to be passive rather than active participants in what we do, meaning that we are kind of just existing. We're not actually engaging in the reality of what we want, or we're not engaging in what we're watching. We're not engaging what we're buying because it's so easy just to click and be impulsive, right? So then we become impulsive. The experience of that does give us some dopamine as well, but we disconnect from that thinking through process, and then this whole cycle starts over again. So this is really how this cycle gets started. So the other piece that's really difficult about this, it's digital indulgence has been normalized, right? So we are a society, and I think probably globally, this is also pretty true in a lot of countries, where it agrees that overconsumption of things like alcohol or fast food or sweets or things like that are really unhealthy things to do. So we really encourage people not to do that. But we also get the same dopamine input from being online. And we have normalized and said, well, that's good because we need to be on social media. You need to be connected with other people. You need to be able to see funny videos and do these things. And we've made it a market, right? If we think of influencers and things like that, they have made a whole market on being online 24/7. So it's become normal, but it's also still an addiction. When we cannot be offline for more than a few hours, without experiencing some sort of anxiety or feeling of loss, that is an addiction. But we've normalized it and said, well, that's what we do these days. So really thinking about it a little bit differently and saying, but actually, how is social media, how is technology, how is this engaging in this, fueling my life in a positive and a negative way? Because both of those things can be true. So here's a fun fact, and many of you could probably relate to this in some sort of way, but we usually have about 15 tabs open in our brains all the time, right? And I'm a mother of two. I run my own business. I am also a therapist, so I can relate to this a lot. Where it's like I have a grocery list, I have what time kids things are, what time I got to do this, how are we going to do dinner, who's going to pick who up, who's going to do this, how's my work going to work, what are my clients doing, all of these things, right? And so those of us who have jobs and who are also parents or who are one or the other, it doesn't matter. We usually have all of these things open in our brain and we're constantly thinking about them. But what that has done is we've trained ourselves to be constantly distracted. We've trained ourselves to say, well, I can't focus on one thing because that's not quote unquote efficient. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I have to focus on all these things to ensure that they all get done. Well, that also means we're not giving our time and energy to any one thing to make it the best it can be or to do it correctly or to do it the way we want. So we've trained ourselves to be distracted all the time. If there's not 15 tabs open in our brain, we pick up our phones and we start doing stuff in our technical world or technology world where we get ourselves distracted, whether that's playing games or reading things or going on Reddit or whatever that looks like. That's where we feel the most calm, which again is not helpful because it also triggers our stress response system. So our brains were never meant to multitask. Right? Our brains were never meant to sit here and switch from one thing to the other. It actually reduces productivity by about 40% when we do task switching or when we're trying to multitask. 40%. Think about that in a work sense. If I had my brain working, I would even say we don't even have to have 100%. Let's say 75% of the time, how much more I would get done, how much more efficient I would be, how much easier things would be if I could do that. But then I reduce that by 40% because I'm trying to multitask or I'm distracted by all these other things. That means I'm only 35% efficient. That's a striking number. If I'm only 35% efficient, I get nothing done that I need to get done, right? Or it takes me twice as long, or I feel like I'm always falling behind. So we really need to work on this. So the term multitasking began in the 1960s when IBM first used it to discuss computer functionalities. So really multitasking was not made for human beings. It was made for computers because computers can do multiple things at a time, have multiple systems running at a time, and that made them more productive, right? So think about our computers now. A lot of you are probably watching in this, or even our phones. You have a bunch of systems running in the background all together to make the function of that device easier to use for us, right? That's really what it was. Then we brought it to humanity and we said, well, if I can multitask, if I can cook dinner and do the kids' homeworks with them and do this and that, then I can get so much more done. If I can do 3 projects at the same time at work, I can get so much more done. But what happened is that we noticed the productivity of people and the stress level of people was exponentially higher, right? Stress levels exponentially higher, your productivity goes down exponentially. So we have this huge gap. And the concept of multitasking for human beings was finally debunked in 2001 when we did MRI imaging that showed what we think of as multitasking is our brain switching to different tasks very quickly. But it also means that we're not focusing. It also means it creates a stress response in our brain and in our bodies. So then our task switching doesn't actually connect to the frontal cortex of our brain. So it can't process the stimuli and it doesn't think through the situations efficiently, right? So the frontal cortex plans for our future. It helps process the stimuli. It helps us understand consequences of actions or what we do. But when we multitask, that part turns off because we go into survival mode, right? So that fight, flight, or freeze gets kicked on, our adrenaline gets kicked on, and what it does is it raises our stress. And our frontal cortex cannot live in that space. Right? So another piece of this is decision fatigue. So I have a question from everybody to kind of really think about and reflect on ourselves. But how often do we endlessly scroll on movie options or through our phones, whether that's on a social media app or Amazon or whatever that looks like, right? A shopping app. I know there's lots of them. I'm old school. Sorry. I don't have a lot of those on. But we constantly scroll through it. And there's so many choices. What do I watch? What kind of things do I do? What do I order? Do I not order? Do I do this or do I look at this? Ooh, whose friends haven't I seen in a while or whatever that looks like. Now, what happens is we get overwhelming amount of choices and the constant digital notifications and stuff like that deter our ability to focus and encourage impulsivity, right? So we think of impulsivity, think of a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, even a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old, and they're flipping off couches. And we could probably tell them a million times, don't flip off the couch, you're going to hurt yourself. But they're impulsive. They don't care, right? They can't think through that situation until it occurs to them or until it happens to them that they do get hurt. So we say, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. They get hurt, so then they learn, but they're impulsive, right? So when we're impulsive as adults, we tend to buy things we don't need. We overspend. We engage in things that aren't healthy for us. Like all of that stuff is impulsive decisions. Now, what happens is it's really hard then to go through our life because we're trying to make all these decisions all the time that we go to lunch and we go, well, I don't know what I feel like. I don't know what I want. Or how many of us have been with a partner and said, what do you want for dinner? And you guys spend the next 20 minutes saying, I don't know, or throwing out ideas and for our partner or for ourselves to go, oh, that doesn't sound good. Oh, I don't know about that. Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, I'm sure many of us have, right? And the reason for that is because we're always in this decision fatigue. We're always in this overstimulated space. right? So how do we avoid that? Well, first we have to prioritize decisions. What's really important for us to decide on today is that, and I'll say this, my kids have uniforms for school, so I had to decide what uniforms and how many I needed to buy. That was really important because my kids are growing up so fast. So that's important. But maybe making a decision on what video I'm going to watch is not. So I need to cross that off my list and not do it. A decision about work might be really important, or about family, or about dinner, or about activities. Like those things we need to prioritize as top of our list and the less down below, right? Make a list of it is the other thing. If we can make a list of it in our brain or on or physically is probably better, right? If we can physically write it, either on a whiteboard or a piece of paper or whatever, so we can see it, then we can cross it off and know what do I need to focus on, what do I not. The other piece is focusing on the most critical things first. So we talk a lot about this in a work environment as well, right? Do the projects that are really hard to do or you don't want to do are going to take a lot of brain power first. Because by the end of the day, most of us are not able to function properly. We're tired, we're grumpy, we're fatigued, we're all of these things, and we don't want to do the really hard stuff. So we procrastinate. So do the hard stuff first, where our brain can process that and make the critical decisions we need to make with the most energy that we have. The other piece is go with our gut. I think a lot of people struggle with this because they want to make a perfect choice. And guess what? Life isn't perfect. We're not going to make a perfect choice. So go with our gut. If you're saying this feels like the most important thing to focus on right now, go with it. Right? If it's kids, if it's family, if it's work, if it's whatever, go with it first. We can always come back around, right? We can always learn from things, but we can never do anything if we're so worried about making a perfect choice that we get paralyzed by that. The next biggest thing is doing things in a daily routine. Make sure that we take breaks, right? When we have a routine, our brain is able to function 1,000% better. And the reason for that is because our brain likes pattern predictable routines, right? So it doesn't mean that everything in our life is always predictable, but the biggest piece is that we can say, okay, right now, I wake up, I drink my coffee, I get ready for work, I put my shirt on first, my pants on next, or whatever, right? Some of these automatic things are part of our daily routine, but really creating it in a purposeful way, saying, I'm going to take a break at 11 and I'm going to take a break at 2 and I'm going to go for a walk for 10 minutes, or I'm going to go get some coffee, or I'm going to go get some water, which would be great, right? We want to fuel our body with things that are going to function well. I'm going to talk to a friend. I'm going to do whatever, right? So creating some of these routines with these breaks is also going to be really important, because when we can do that, we lower that stress response system, we engage our frontal cortex, remember our thinking part of our brain, and we're able to make decisions that are most effective and probably better for us than when we're doing it impulsively. So that's a super important piece of how to decrease that decision fatigue, but also decrease the popcorn brain, right? A break isn't being distracted on our phones. It is engaging in a piece of your reality to help your stress response system lower itself. Unfortunately, our phones and media is not always that way. I will say, I'm not going to say never engage in it, but we really need to lessen it and to move our bodies to make sure that we're working through that stress. So here's a really awesome thing. We can rewire our brains, right? We can rewire them. Our brains are not set in stone, right? They're not solidly set, so they can't change. We can never change. No, our brains are always changing. Our neural pathways, which are the really cool little connections in our brains that tell us how to predict things, how to interact with certain pieces of our environment or people or what to do, those are always changing based on experience and patterns, right? So when we don't feel accomplished, we develop anxiety and depression, right? So think about that. I mean, we have all probably felt that. Man, I feel so behind at work, and I feel also so anxious and trying to figure out where to start and where to go, which then can lead to depression. I don't feel good enough. I don't feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I feel like I can't move. I feel like I can't get traction on anything. That's what that develops from. So what's the solution? Focus less on external things and external rewards and more on internal rewards. Now, I'm going to stop here and really focus on this for a second, because I think one thing that happens, and especially with our social media and our devices, is that it's an external reward, right? We get dopamine from seeing these videos or seeing the likes or seeing the comments or engaging in really robust, passionate debates or discussions or arguments or whatever happens online. But that's all external. And once that goes away, we're left feeling really empty. So one of the things we want to do is how do we reward ourselves internally? When we complete a task or complete a goal, we want to be like, hey, how does that make me feel? Oh my gosh, I feel so proud of myself. I feel so good that I got up and worked out this morning. I feel so good that I chose to eat an apple instead of a piece of chocolate. Whatever that looks like, but really pumping ourselves up in that way and saying, wow, I am proud of myself for doing this, right? Wow, my body feels really good. I feel like I'm moving really well. Wow, I feel like my anxiety is lessened because I went for that walk. Whatever that looks like, and really focusing on that will create that internal drive for us to want to keep going, right? Again, it's small. It's small. We don't have to start with really big things. I went for a 10-minute walk. Fabulous. Fabulous. How accomplished do we feel in doing that? Making sure that we keep that part up and not, I worked out for an hour every day, even though I haven't worked out for 20 years. That's going to burn us out. We want to start small, do small things first, and really celebrate reaching those steps. Now, the other piece of this is asking ourselves how we feel throughout the day. Okay, I got up in the morning, I did my quiet time. Maybe my quiet time is reading or yoga or whatever. And now I feel refreshed and ready to go for the day. Wow, that feels really good. When I don't do that, how am I feeling? How's my body feeling? How's my brain feeling? And really taking stock of where all of that is at. Because once we can do that, we become really in tune with ourselves. And then we can say, okay, I know what I need to do when I'm feeling this way. I know what I need to do in order to function better throughout the day. And if I had a really hard day yesterday, or I know today's going to be really hard, how do I bump some of this up? Because I know it makes me feel better, right? And really engaging in that like self-care piece of all of this. The other piece is how do we take steps to create new normals? When we work from home, what we have noticed for most people is it's really, really tough for us to create a consistent schedule and a healthy schedule, right? So a lot of it is we lose a commute, so we work more, but we're also less efficient because we're more distracted. And then we also don't take breaks, right? So then I see a lot of times people going to work super in the morning, working super late at night, but then in the middle of the day, we're distracted, which is why we're doing those things, but we're not actually taking breaks to help us function in a way that feels productive for us. So a big piece of this is set timers for things, right? Or set reminders for things. Maybe we're setting a timer to get up and go walk instead of getting up and looking at our phone. Maybe we're actually putting silencing on our notifications for our day at work, right? So we can't see them. They're not popping up. Maybe we're making sure that we plan 3 to 4, 5-minute breaks throughout our day. Or maybe I'm making sure every couple of hours I'm getting a 15 to 20-minute or 30-minute break if that's possible, right? But setting those up and setting them in our calendar so we know that they're there and that other people know they're there and making them non-negotiable times, right? The other piece I really talk with people about is making sure that we have tech-free times, right? Or tech-free zones, meaning, this is an example in our family, when we're at dinner, we don't have technology on. Whether it's our phones, our tablets, the TV, whatever that looks like, none of it's there. Limit our time with that because I want to engage in my reality and with the people around me, right? I want to be able to make eye contact with my kiddos and really hear about what their day was like, or my husband, or my partner, or whatever that looks like, right? Like these are things that are really important for us to do. We also want to do it when we're engaging with other people outside our lives, right? When I talk with people, I put my phone away because I want to make sure that I'm engaged with them fully and I'm engaged in the reality of what's happening now, not in what's happening in my technology. Then you can have technology time later. Put time specifically for that, right? Maybe my tech time is 7 o'clock at night, or maybe it's 6:30, we watch a movie with the family, or whatever that looks like. But making sure we create some of these scheduling pieces so it helps us develop a way to not get distracted by it all the time. Now, here's something we get asked about a lot. A lot of people go, well, I feel like I've developed ADHD in my adulthood. Or what's the difference between popcorn brain and ADHD? Because they do look very similar. The biggest thing I tell people is that ADHD is often a lifelong thing that happens. right? So I'll say ADHD and ADD. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Hyperactivity disorder piece of it usually means that it's hard for our bodies to sit still. It's hard for our bodies to maintain a sedentary state. We see this with kids a lot, and not all kids have ADHD. So let me preface this. But it's harder for kids to sit, so they need more movement. As we grow older, it's a little bit different. Our attention span should be longer, shouldn't need as much movement in our day. However, sometimes the ADHD is also, I have to move my body so much and my brain turns off, right? So that's kind of what happens. But again, it's a lifelong thing. ADD, which is an attention deficit disorder, that's more where our brain can't focus on one thing very often. It's very similar to that popcorn brain, but again, it's a lifelong thing, right? So it's not so much that we have so much energy in our body, it's that our brain has more energy, but we see it from childhood to adulthood. So it doesn't really manifest later. Popcorn brain is really triggered by situational factors. So constant notifications popping up on our phone, constant multitasking, constantly having connection to our email, constantly having connection to any sort of digital media that comes up whenever we want, right? So that's really what happens with popcorn brain. Because we create a habit of constantly being on, it's hard for us to turn it off. And then it's hard for us to then refocus and regain control of that, right? Another way to think about it is ADD and ADHD are a neurological condition that requires clinical diagnosis, right? It also is evidence of other impairments in other areas of our life. So things like sleep, emotions, impulse control. For kids, a lot of times we see it in learning where it's really hard for them to focus. So we have to figure out new ways to do that kind of stuff, right? Popcorn brain, again, usually develops because of situational factors, and isn't a neurologically based condition. It's more of a habitually based condition, right? So it's a habit that we've created that now has become an issue in our life. So this is a quote that I really like, and I think I want a lot of us to take stock and really reflect on what this means. But we've transformed the world from a place of scarcity to a place of overwhelming abundance. The smartphone is the modern day hypodermic needle delivering digital dopamine 24/7 for a wired generation. This is from the book Dopamine Nation by Anna Lembeck, I want to say. But it's a really, really great book because it talks about finding the balance of being constantly engaged in this 24-hour digital dopamine hit, right? Which all of us have access to also finding peace outside of that. And how do we balance this? Because our world is 24/7 connected. We can access anything all the time. Our smartphones or computers now have access to everything, but we really want to find time where we disconnect from that and engage in the real world, engage with people face to face, engage in nature, engage in these other things that are actually healthier for us to be. And also training ourselves that it's okay to be bored, right? It's okay to be bored because that's usually when creativity, when thoughtfulness and other things come out. And so we really have to retrain ourselves to that because we've been so addicted to this 24-hour dopamine hit from getting rewarded constantly. Here's some other recommended readings that I really like. There's a couple of them, or one of them for kids. So Raising Mentally Strong Kids. Again, it talks a lot about screen time, how to make sure to help kids focus, how to help them realize when their body needs to move and things like that. And then these other two, Stolen Focus and The Siren's Calls, are really about how do we kind of come back to this place of being able to pay attention to things and think deeply, and to have more cognitive thought processes around things before we do the impulsive things, right? And so it's kind of retraining us, and it tells us a really good guide of how to do that. And this is just a little bit of information about Core Medical. And so I'll leave that up for now. But I hope everybody enjoyed today's presentation and talk and really are able to kind of see the difference of popcorn brain, how it really develops and what we can do to stop it. And if anybody has any questions, you all can feel free to reach out. Hope everybody has a wonderful day.